And I think we are live now. Live now here from Aarhus. And if I remember correctly, from Knoxville, Tennessee. Mark, welcome
Yes,
to you.
that is correct in the southern United States.
Okay, great. I'm curious. We are sort of leaving summer, entering early spring. How is it at your end now? Weather.
You're leaving, are you entering spring or fall?
No. We're sort of leaving summer and entering fall. I think I got that
Yeah,
wrong.
entering fall.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But we're still
yeah,
having a yeah.
we've got the trees changing here. Here, I'll show you. Here's my view in Tennessee. I don't know if you can see that or not, but
Wow.
the leaves are starting to change. It's kind of a gloomy, rainy day here, but
It kind of looks fantastic. Anyway,
yeah, yeah, I have a
what
beautiful view.
Mark, what you see here behind me is, I mean, don't get this wrong. Most of class is following this online because we've activated the Q&A module in this Hangout, and we're inviting everyone to join along also with their questions. And that's actually easier for folks if they go back to their dorms and wherever they live, and some are even in Copenhagen. So most of the class is actually online. And the few people here are the people who absolutely wanted to get this event in the physical format. So hello to you guys, and thanks, Mark, for joining us here. We really appreciate that. I should tell you that this session here comes at the end of 5 really hard-packed days discussing journalism and social media, and also journalism roles. Leaving behind old automatic thinking in terms of writing articles and putting stuff out there, and trying to get to grips with a new world where we as journalists actually might gather the courage to ask questions instead of just make output. So we're sort of looking forward to have that discussion with you. But Mark, I know that people who follow you on your blog and podcast and read your books, and by the way, it's the curriculum here is also part of the curriculum is your book Tower of Twitter. They can see that you're very much into digital marketing, but I seem to have heard in the podcast that you actually started out as a journalist. Describe to us what was your journey towards social media and digital marketing as a journalist?
Well, yeah, I actually in college I started out as a chemistry major. I really loved science, and I avoided. I loved to write. I was an avid reader and a writer all the way through my education. And when I got to the university, I had heard all the stories about you can't make a career in journalism, you can't make any money in journalism. And those are the same stories we're hearing today. um, but I took an introduction to journalism class, and I was hooked. I became a journalism major, and one of the main reasons was I love the people in journalism. I love the people who they seemed like they wanted to make a change in the world. They wanted to search for truth, and they became my friends. And I thought, this is the kind of group of people I want to be with. This is the kind of people I want to be with in my career. So I started in journalism. And then while I was in college, I made some relationships with some PR professionals in big companies in Pittsburgh, and I started thinking about, public relations back then was, a lot more media oriented traditional media oriented than it was today. So I worked in journalism for a short time, and eventually started to work for a company in Pittsburgh. And while I was in college, I also took some marketing classes, and I discovered I really loved marketing. And when I was working for this big company, it was a big metals and mining company called Alcoa. I got to be friends with this marketing manager, and at this one plant, we were putting in this $50 million new piece of equipment that was going to employ 200 new people, and it was all because of an idea he came up with to create a new product and grow our market. And I thought, if that's what marketing is about, that's what I really want to be a part of. To me, it was really the front lines of business. It was creating new value and creating new employment opportunities. And I thought, I just started to fall in love with that. And of course, communications and writing is an important part of that. I've worked in marketing, global marketing, for many years, and then in 2008, I started my own company. I started to teach at Rutgers University in the New York City area. It's in across the river in New Jersey, one of the largest universities, one of the top business schools in America, and started to consult. And today, I'm consulting with a lot of big companies, a lot of global brands you might recognize, like IBM and Johnson & Johnson. And of course, I write my blog. I've written books. I continue to teach. And the interesting thing is, the degree I got in journalism was the best possible degree I could have ever received for what I'm doing today. And I've said that at every point in my career, that the ability to communicate, the ability to write clearly and in a compelling way has helped me at every single point in my career. I started a blog in 2008, 2009, and the blog is really what opened up a lot of doors for me. Again, I love to write, and in journalism school, we learn to write quickly, to write well, and to write quickly. And certainly that's a good skill to have in blogging. And I think the thing that really made a big difference for me was there weren't a lot of really experienced business people blogging at that point. There were a lot of new people, young people, people maybe with agency experience, but I came in with 27 years of business and marketing experience, and that was something new at that time. That was something fresh at that time, and so I think that's what really captured people's imaginations. The blog has been very effective for me in terms of getting new business, making wonderful new connections. Like, I'm here with you today, I'm sure, because of the social media connections.
Yes.
And so that's a little bit about my background.
So, because I actually did find you through your blog, so exactly as you describe here.
Yeah.
I mean, when we think about how fast things are going, how much we talk social media, you bring up the blog now, and you've written books about it. And I mean, the blog, is that not yesterday? Is it still relevant for you?
Yeah, I think I think the blog is actually more important than ever. There are certain technological trends that are going against blogging right now. Number one actually is mobile, because my audience has shifted. When I was starting to blog 5 or 6 years ago, most people would be viewing this on a laptop computer or even a desktop computer. And it's a lot easier to read the blog with a big screen. It's a lot easier to comment on a blog with a full-size keyboard. So as my audience has shifted to mobile, you're now having to read a blog on a small screen. Most of my blogs tend to be 1,000 words or more, which is kind of on the long side. It's difficult to read on a small screen. It's difficult to comment on a small screen. Of course, there has been more opportunities, more applications in social media that have kind of rallied for people's attention, and so it's become a lot more noisy. It's become a lot more crowded, and I feel the need to just keep upping my game as far as the content, to strive to earn that trust, to earn that attention every day. But I think it's more important, and I think it's it's probably either video, podcasting, or blogging. You really need some sort of rich form of content to establish your voice of authority. And it's got to be one of those three, really. Maybe photographic to some extent, depending on who you are and what your business is.
So I'm sorry, so you see Facebook and Twitter as add-ons to that?
Facebook and Twitter are the distribution channels for the content, I think. Facebook and Twitter, it's difficult to really build a voice of authority. Let me give you one quick example. A few years ago, I wrote a blog post about a new technology, a new marketing idea, and it went viral. People loved the article. And 3 weeks after I wrote the article, I got a call from a reporter from the New York Times. And she said, "Can I interview you about this article that you wrote for my article that I'm working on?" And so I was quoted 4 times in the New York Times. It was syndicated. It went all over the world. Now, if I had only been posting on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, would my ideas be discovered? Would my ideas be incorporated into an article in the most important newspaper in the United States? No. So I needed to have some sort of rich content, long-form content, and I think that could only come in the form of a video, a podcast, or a blog. So that's why I think blogging will continue to be important, because a lot of people prefer their learning mode. I mean, some people are auditory, some people are visual, some people like to read. So I think that's going to be important and continue to appeal to a certain demographic for really forever.
Interesting. Mark, can I ask you, we've spent a week now together sort of navigating input, actually quite a lot from outside of journalism, from digital marketing, from other sources who are maybe, at least in Danish terms, a year or a few years ahead of how you can actually leverage the power of social media. And interestingly, at a session earlier here today, one of my students said, it's kind of difficult having to all the time, because journalism, at least in Denmark, lags a bit behind, having to translate these things into our own environment. So can we maybe translate that together? I mean, are we talking a blog and some form of journalistic output and then some social media, or could we maybe switch back and forth between putting out some journalism in traditional formats instead of blogging? Or are you actually saying that outside of also our traditional output, we should have a voice in, for instance, a blog or a podcast? Can you follow me?
Yes, let me respond to that in 2 ways. There's a very your student has a very keen insight, and it's a very keen question. And so the first thing I'd like to talk about is that we have to remember that although the technologies are changing very, very quickly, the human needs behind these technologies are the same. So we can't be overwhelmed by technological change. We have to remember the fundamentals. We have to remember who we are as humans, how we connect, how we create emotional connections, how we create emotional connections to content. I think that's an important thing to think about. Content as a brand, I think, would be a very interesting discussion for your students. Journalism as a brand. People might wear a certain set of clothes, or they'll buy a certain car because it's a form of their self-identity. It's an extension of who they are. They're communicating when they do that. Same thing with reading. Same thing with sharing content, which is really where power on the web comes from. Not just the content, but sharing the content. So why do people share content? Because it makes them feel cool. It makes them feel relevant. It makes them look smart. It makes them look funny or entertaining. So I think those are a couple things to think about. Is that, number one, don't be, stay focused on what's going on here with the humans behind the technology. Don't necessarily get overwhelmed by the technology and let the technology drive what you do. Think about the human needs. Think about how people are, your readers, how are they suffering? How can you help them? How can you entertain them? How can you inform them? And that will, I think if you stay grounded in that, that will help you define how you create content and where you create content. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I guess you're actually going back to what journalism's roots are, and
Yeah,
I guess
absolutely.
what you're saying is that those are still very, very relevant, despite of all the
Yeah,
noise around us.
I think it's more relevant than ever. And although the the definition really of journalism is shifting a little bit, because today a journalist is basically, I'm there and you're not. Anybody can be a journalist because you've got a smartphone recording events happening before your eyes. I mean, isn't that a journalist? As you're recording some event for the world. But I think for a professional journalist, I think we have to really remember, why are we there? I mean, it's so important. It's more important than ever. And don't be overwhelmed by the technology. Just think about why people should be connecting with you, and I think that will make things more clear.
Great. So maybe we can talk a little bit about then how then to leverage technology in these new opportunities, because the situation here is that you have a class, they're about to graduate, in a few months they are on the job market as professional journalists, and they have for the next couple of months, all is, I guess, is well and quiet. They have some passion projects and they're not pressed by the job market, but they can work with their projects now for the next couple of months, and all of them have ideas for themes and relevant journalism, just as we've been discussing them. So how then, I mean, could we try and go through some ideas and steps as to how then to leverage this new technology to build a platform around this idea, around this story, around this theme? Do you follow me?
Yeah,
Is it a
well,
blog? Is it a Facebook page? Is it a Twitter?
I lecture at a lot of universities, and I think, I recommend very highly to students that are about to enter the job market, again, um, to really to start blogging. I think everybody that is in a job hunt should start to blog, and here's why. If you're going on a job interview and you've got different work samples, the other thing that you should include in your resume is a link to your blog. And at the end of your interview, you should say, look, don't just take my word for what I can do. Click this link and see what I can do. And I think it's possible to blog strategically. And let me give you an example of what I mean. I interviewed for a job several years ago. It was for a vice president position at a big company in New York. And they said, here are the 5 things this job has to do. So before my interview, I wrote 5 blog posts. And those blog posts were about the 5 things this job needed to do. And I was able to show what I thought about this, how I could communicate, that I could manage a community, and my community had ideas about this too. And so so people, I mean, they wanted to see my blog before they interviewed me, and they could see right before their eyes what I thought about this, And they didn't know necessarily I was blogging for this job, but I was. And I think it's an important way to create some awareness, some voice of authority that can potentially help you get some advantage in your market. Yeah. I think establishing a social media audience is important. Everybody goes to LinkedIn to try to build business relationships that can lead to a job, but don't overlook Twitter. And here's why. There's not much socialization going on in LinkedIn. LinkedIn largely is an HR tool. There's not a lot of social dialogue there. It's hard to build relationships. But if there are people that you admire, people that can help you, maybe people who can even employ you someday, start following them on Twitter. Look for opportunities to connect, to engage, to get to know them. Look for opportunities to retweet them. When you retweet them, that gets you on their radar screen. And they're going to say, oh my goodness, who is this person? Oh, it's a student. Oh gosh, that's so nice, a student is following me. And at some point maybe you can say, hey, I'm going to be in Copenhagen. Can we have a cup of coffee or something together? I think number one, establish your voice of authority. Use these social platforms to show what you can do, and then also use them to build a network of people that can help you when you're ready to look for a job.
Yeah, great. I think actually even one thing is a blog, but even starting out on Twitter, it can be difficult and a bit daunting to actually determine your voice. Have you got a few inputs and tips on that? I mean, how do you actually establish your voice when you don't really know what that voice is?
I don't think there's any shortcut, but you just have to do it. It's like any other skill. You have to practice. You have to immerse yourself. Even on my blog, my blog was so much different a year after I started it. My blog is different today than it was 6 months ago. My voice is evolving as my thinking is evolving. My voice is evolving as I'm getting feedback from my community about what they like, what they don't like, what I'm being rewarded for. The social web is very sensitive. If you do good work, you're going to know. If you do something that doesn't go over, you'll find that out too. And so it's a great feedback mechanism, and I don't think there's any shortcut. I think you just have to commit to being consistent, getting out there and publishing something every day or every couple days, and just learn as you go. I don't think there's another way to do it.
No. And I mean, it almost sounds as if you're saying it doesn't have to be so clear-cut and professionalized as you start out.
I agree. I mean, I don't think that, don't be too hard on yourself. Just kind of explore and see how it goes and have some fun. In fact, honestly, a lesson that I learned, that being too professional hurt me. And how I learned that was when I started my blog, it was very formal. I had in mind that I had a certain message and I had a certain target audience, and two things happened. First of all, nothing happened. No reader response, no comments. As they say here in America, they were like crickets. It was so quiet you could hear the crickets. And the other thing happened is that I got bored. I got bored kind of sticking to this formula. And when I started to relax and started to say, I'm going to show my personality a bit. I'm going to be funny once in a while. I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to teach a lesson based on something that I learned in my real life. That's when things transformed, because instead of me finding my audience found me. And that was much more effective and much more powerful.
But it takes courage, doesn't it?
It does take a little bit of courage. I think courage is the most important characteristic of creating effective content on the web. How are you going to stand out? There's only one way, and that is to be original in some way. There's only one way to be original. That's to be you, and to let yourself show through in some way. Now I know you can't really do that in a strict journalism job, but I think as far as building a personality, building a presence on the web, that's critical, because you want to build that emotional connection to you as a person, and having the courage to tell a story about yourself, having the courage to expose yourself a little bit is what makes the difference. That's not easy for me. I have to push myself to do that, and I'm still somewhat careful about what I share. I mean, I don't talk a lot about my family, let's say, but I do talk about things going on with me. I talk about my feelings. I talk about failures. I talk about things that concern me, and here's what I find so amazing. Every time I take that risk, the feedback that comes from the social web is, "Thank goodness you said that. I was worried about this too," or "I was thinking the same thing too." And here's the difference. I had the courage to say it. Everybody else is thinking it, but I had the courage to say it. And that's what makes me different, and I think that's why people like my content.
Yeah. And as we're looking to sort of revitalize journalism, which is, I mean, hard hit by many things these years, do you see room for that vulnerability, I guess we can call it, also in the voice of a journalist?
I mean, I think that's a very good question. It's almost, I mean, it's kind of dangerous, I think, when the journalist becomes the brand. So I think you have to look at. I don't think there's a cookie cutter answer. There never is. I think you have to look at the situation and look at what are your goals and what's the kind of content that you want to create and what's the kind of job that you're going to be in. But I do think there is an opportunity to build a readership, and I think that's important because that's transferable. And there's no greater way, I don't think, to build to build your image and your relationship than building your personal brand on the social web. So I would stop short of saying this is a mandate, because I think it's an individual choice. But I think it's an opportunity I would like people to think about, is to build a brand so that if people are interested in you, they'll be interested in your content. If they're interested in your content, that's a transferable skill.
Yeah, great. Great answer. There's a question here from Cornelius. It's maybe referring a bit back to what you said about students entering the job market. And you already actually gave one pointer. Let me just select it here. Cornelius asked, have you got any advice how to actually start connecting with the future employer without it sort of being embarrassing or too hard, pushing too hard?
Okay, so it tweaked the question tweaked out a little bit. Was the question any advice for connecting and not pushing too hard?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's a great question, and I think it goes back to one of my earlier answers, to remember that behind every one of these little avatars on the web is a real person. And let's act on the web like we would act in real life. In the Dolph Twitter book that you've read, or I hope you've read,
about to read, the first story in the book talks about a powerful connection that was created for me. And the thing I love about this story is that this relationship that led to many business benefits started with one tweet about sports. And I love that story because that's how we build relationships in real life. We talk about our favorite football team. We talk about
our favorite tennis player. We talk about the weather or food, restaurants that we love. That's how relationships get formed. And so we have to think about that's how relationships get formed on the social web as well. We're attracted to people who are helpful. We're attracted to people who care about other people. And I think if we express that same authentic attitude on the web, people will be attracted to us rather than people who are pushing and selling and advertising. It just, we have to be human.
So I guess in terms of Cornelius's question, I don't know whether you can actually see it on the right-hand side of your screen, but I guess connecting with a possible future employer actually then starts with listening to that person.
Yeah, look for opportunities to connect. Here's a very good example. One of the benefits of Twitter compared to LinkedIn is for professional use is that to connect with somebody on LinkedIn, they have to follow you back. On Twitter, that's not the case. If they're active on Twitter, you can follow them and you can look for opportunities to engage. So let's say they post something on Twitter or possibly LinkedIn. Again, some people post on LinkedIn, not many, but let's say they said, we closed a big deal today. Now, even if they haven't followed you back, you can write them a note back and say, congratulations. Are they on Instagram? Or could you say maybe they're on a business trip and they're in Barcelona, and you see this beautiful picture, and they're in Barcelona, and say, "Oh, happy to see you're in Barcelona. While I was there, I found this amazing restaurant. Here's a link to that restaurant." Now, those types of interactions are going to get you on their radar screen. Those interactions are going to prompt someone to say, who is this person? They've been so nice. They've been so helpful. I'm going to follow them back. And that's happened to me several times. People I never thought would follow me back. They're big executives at a company. All of a sudden they'll post a picture or something and I'll comment on it. Next thing you know, they're following me back. We're interacting. And then as I said, the real key, something very, very important to remember, is that if you're following somebody for the first time on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever it is, the relationships begin as weak links. These are not links. These are not relationships that you can count on. These are not relationships that you can convert into some sort of business value. So it just opens the door. Now it's up to you. You found this person. You've made a connection, but now you need to take it to the next step, and you need to make it into a strong link. And that you've got to have a conversation. You've got to meet in real life. You've got to have coffee with somebody. Just a quick example of that. Late last year, I decided for the first and only time to ask my social media following to support a charity that I believed in. And I raised about $6,000 in just a couple of days. And I think 85% or 90% of the money that I raised came from social media contacts that I had met in real life. So that shows the power of if you just throw something out there asking for help, it's not going to work. I get random messages from people all the time. Will you please help this? Will you please do that? I don't know these people. I don't know if this is legitimate. It could be a scam. But if it's somebody that I know, if it's a strong link, there's nothing that I won't do to help people. So I think you need to keep that in mind. Simply building an audience doesn't necessarily mean that you're creating power with that audience. You still have to do the work to create the weak link, to convert the weak links to strong links.
That's great answer, Mark. You have for those of the students who haven't yet read your book, you have a concept that goes not just in the book, but I've heard you say this many times, that you have this concept of authentic helpfulness, which I guess is sort of a key thing here, and maybe, I don't know whether this is a cultural thing, but it might actually not be the easiest gear to shift into for a hard-nosed critical journalist, to start actually displaying authentic helpfulness. But I've heard you say again and again that this is actually one of the cornerstones of getting valuable connections through social media.
Yeah, I think it's the most important thing, and there's been a lot of research done that shows the generation that many of you listening to me today are in the millennial generation, and there's a lot of research that shows that the millennial generation is the least trusting generation. And if you try to push something on millennials, and I don't think this is just millennials, I think it's most people. If people sense that you're trying to sell them something, or that you've got an agenda, or you're trying to manipulate them or use them or get something out of them in some way, the barriers are going to go up. But if people sense that you are truly a nice person, a helpful person, somebody that will go out of their way to create value, then that's going to be very attractive. They're not going to run away from you. They're going to be attracted to you, and that's the first step toward building this strong link.
Yeah, great. Can I maybe go a little bit back to the blog? Let's say that we have now a project underway. We're talking journalism here, and we have a theme we're focusing on. We have a housing crisis in Denmark. Just to give you an example, people have a hard time selling their houses, and it's a problem for them if they live in an area where they can't get any jobs. Lots of stories, lots of story opportunities there. It might be actually a project that these students do now, or once they're journalists. How would you, would you say that one thing is that we produce journalistic products? Obviously we do that, and we hope that they would read them or look at them or listen to them. But do you see room for a blog on the side? We're sort of looking for new ways to sort of let people connect to our voices.
Well, excuse me. I was so close to you last week. I was in Finland. Oh. And I wish we could have connected, because someday I would love to. I'm so jealous of the class that you're in and the discussions that you're having. And someday we need to plan it that I can come and sit in some of these classes, because I want to learn and have these discussions with you.
We'll make a plan for that for sure.
But here in America, I think journalists, many journalists, serious journalists, are able to do both, and they're able to report very seriously on an issue, and then in a blog, give a little additional insight about the emotion in the courtroom, or something physical about the courtroom, or at some point maybe even revealing, wow, this really had an impact on me. In the example that you're talking about with the housing crisis, you can report on this housing crisis in a very serious way. But why not on a blog say, hey, I wrote this article today, and I can really empathize with these people, because my mother and father at one time were refugees, and I know what it's like to be disenfranchised, or to be struggling, or I'm going through this problem myself. I can't sell my house, and here are as I wrote my article, here are 3 resources that I found that can help you. Here are some agencies. Here are some other content sites. here are 3 things I found. I couldn't put this in my article, but if you enjoyed this article, here are some other resources I found that can help you. And I don't think, sharing things like that, making it a richer experience for your readers, I think there are some ways that you can do that and not cross the line. And I think there are many journalists in America that are doing that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess there might be some cultural differences here, because we do tend to have long discussions here, whether it's the traditional role of the journalist being fair and not take part or show their opinions.
Yeah.
It kind of comes across quite hard, I think, for many Danish journalists to actually go out there and start blogging. But it's an interesting thing, and
it is interesting, and I want to emphasize, because this is important. I'm not being prescriptive about anything. I'm just talking about options, and I'm talking about opportunities that are out there. I think that we need serious journalism, and I think people need to look at their role, and they need to look at their hearts. They need to look at their long-term career goals and examine. I mean, I'm not saying that you must do this. I'm saying that the opportunities are there, the technology is there, and it might even be a richer experience for you as an individual. It might even be fun to do something like this. But I said this before, and I just want to make sure that everyone hears this, that I am not being prescriptive. I'm not telling anybody what to do. That I think these decisions are very personal decisions, and there's room for that diversity in journalism.
Yeah, great. My mouse has frozen, so I'm not actually able to move Cornelius's question down. And I'm afraid to do anything because I don't want to lose the connection here.
Right.
But maybe we can use.
How about anybody in the classroom there have a question? Let me put you on the spot.
Yeah. I have one in the meantime while you're thinking. And I think that might actually provoke some questions. You wrote a blog post a while ago, Mark, that created maybe not controversy, but at least a lot of discussion. You wrote about content shock and this phenomenon. You can explain it. Yeah, you can better explain it yourself. But I wanted to ask you, maybe partly to explain what you meant about content shock and how this affects us as content professionals, and also this thing about having the courage to actually putting your personal voice out there is one of the remedies for content shock. Do you follow me?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very simple idea, but it's a concept that's being ignored, I think, because it's a little frightening to think about. And the concept is this. Between today and the year 2020, the amount of information on the internet is expected to increase by at least 600%. So let's get our minds around this. In the next, if you can imagine the vastness of the internet, in the next 6 years, there are going to be 6 of those. That's a lot of information. And so an individual piece of content is going to be more and more difficult to shine through. It's going to be more difficult for that content to be be discovered, to be and to be shared. And then even when it's shared, be diluted into a sea of an unimaginable sea of content. And so I wrote this article, and I wrote a series of articles because I know the attention span of most readers is short, so you can't write a 10,000 word article. You've got to write a 1,000 word article 10 different times. And I described, so that's on the supply side. The other piece is the demand side. And I showed some statistics that indicate that the amount of content that we consume has been going up year after year after year. In fact, every time there's a technological shift, the amount of content we consume goes up. So for For decades, all we had were books and newspapers, so we read. And once we had radio, boom, we consumed more content. Once we had television, we consumed more content. The internet, digital gaming, movies. Every time there's a technological shift, we consume more. In America, on average, we consume 10 hours of content a day. I think in the Baltic nations, it's at least that much, maybe even a little bit more. So my question is, how much higher can that go? Is it going to be 11 hours a day, 12 hours a day? So here are the two trends that are hitting each other. Number one, the amount of content is elevating, exploding at an almost unimaginable rate. Number two, our ability to consume it is finite. And so it drives economic pressure on the content creators. That means me and you. How are we going to get that content heard? How are we going to get that content shared? So if you think through some of the economics of this, you can kind of predict what that's going to mean. The bad news is that, let me give you a quick example from Facebook. Organic reach on Facebook, meaning if I post something on Facebook that gets seen by my followers, has declined from 23% 2 years ago to 6% today. 71% of the companies on Facebook have had a decline in organic reach of 30% or more in just the last 12 months. That's content shock. There's too much stuff. There's too much content. So Facebook has to ratchet it back. And what do we have to do? Number one, either we've got to spend money to create even better content, even more exciting content, or two, we've got to pay Facebook to show it. Either way, something's got to change. It's costing us more. Now, here's the good news for you. There's almost an insatiable demand on the web for content. A new study came out yesterday that showed that 85% of chief marketing officers, this was a worldwide study, 85% said that their marketing programs at their companies were failing because they couldn't find enough content creators. That's you. I mean, you're a content creator. So I was talking to a dean at a journalism school here in America, and he said they have record enrollment at their journalism school. And I said, well, where are all these people getting jobs? He said, it's not necessarily in journalism. It could be alternative media. Yeah. So, I mean, every company, there's this new job now, brand journalist. What does that what does that really mean? But companies are paying big bucks. I'm even being paid money now by companies to create content. I guess I can share this. Is that I have a company. They're paying me $1,000 a blog post for one blog post, and they have no editorial control. I write about whatever I want to write about, and they're taking they take that and they're putting it on their company site. $1,000 for 500 words. So and this is not unusual. Now I'm established, so my rates are probably I'm getting rates that are probably higher than other people, but I'm saying that this is good news for you. That if you can't find a traditional journalism job, there's an insatiable need for content out there.
Yeah. So that's really, I mean, that's really it's a really two-sided issue here. Great opportunities for quality content creators, but also content delivering relevant journalism in a world suffering content shock is getting harder than ever. Then, and I guess my point also in asking you this is that there are some questions, we should go through them. But having the courage to then step out and actually start the journey of finding your voice is, I guess, when I'm hearing what you're saying, more necessary now than ever, because how else
Oh
will
yeah.
you stand out?
How else are you gonna stand out? And I mean, I'm at a point now where a company is willing to pay me, $1,000 for 500 words. Look, you put a few of those together, and you could, and even a couple different companies together that are willing to do that. And that's, I mean, primarily I'm a teacher and a consultant, and I also get money off of speaking. But what I'm seeing is that companies are starting to realize, to cut through this information density, to cut through this clutter, we have to find those trusted voices. We have to find those courageous voices. And I've been blogging every week for 5 years. It's taken me 5 years to get to this point. But I agree with you, Christian. You have to start. I mean, it's going to take time for you to find that voice. And this is the point that I've been making. I'm not telling anybody what to do, but I just want you to think about the opportunity of creating a transferable brand, or if things don't work out in traditional journalism, moving into some other kind of content creation that can benefit because you've got a strong brand and a built-in audience.
Great. Mark, as I said, my computer sort of seems to be frozen and I can't really get my mouse working, but I can read these questions. I guess this is what we've been talking about. Anders is asking, how can we as journalists stand out against regular social media users? How do we bring something new to the media stream that others can't, sort of in the same area as we've been, I mean, digging down into your own voice and also chasing original content?
I think those are two things, but here's the third thing, and this is something that's important. I think one of the biggest reasons why I stand out is because I was a journalism major. I'm a good writer. I know how to do this. And I look at other people out there trying to build their brand, and they're hiring people. They're hiring ghostwriters, and it's just not the same. So I think that in this market that we're in today, in this hyper-competitive content market, you have an amazing advantage because you're a journalism major.
Yeah.
So don't take that for granted.
There's an interesting question here from Christian. Most journalistic content that goes viral is text, image, or video based, not so much sound, audio. Why do you think radio or audio doesn't so often go viral, and what can we do anything to change that?
Great question, and I think part of it is that the technology is just starting to enable this. So as I said, people learn by reading or by viewing or by listening. And the fastest growing area right now is audio, is podcasting. So you might think, oh, why is that? Well, it's not that people are changing their habits necessarily. It's because with the perpetuation of mobile devices, now that is in essence having a radio in your pocket everywhere you go. And then you can listen to podcasts and multitask. You can listen to a podcast when you're working out. You can listen to a podcast on a bus or when you're driving a car. And so that's a popular way to consume content. And podcasting has been growing by double digits. So don't overlook podcasting as a legitimate way. It's behind everything else, but the audio form of content is growing very, very quickly.
I've seen that you've started a podcast yourself with a partner. Does it take a lot of work for you?
Well, we've designed it in a way. I mean, we're both very busy, And it was a hard decision for me to start a podcast because I didn't want it to jeopardize the quality of the content on my blog. So we had to figure out a way to do it very, very efficiently. And so most podcasters create a podcast once a week. I only do it every other week. We do it. Some podcasters do an hour. We only do 30 minutes. It's 30 minutes every other week. So it's short, and I think that our listeners want more. They would like us to do it every week. But for me, honestly, just to be able to manage this and keep it enjoyable, I do it really every 30 minutes, and we created a format that wherever I am in the world, I can still do this podcast. I don't have to be in the same room as my podcasting partner. We do it over Skype.
Okay. So I also see that you must spend a ton of time also, you're answering comments on your blog, you're writing blog posts, and on the other hand, it's pretty clear that you must be able to bill your hours instead, but you just seem to be putting in a lot of effort into things that doesn't, at least at the outset, actually pay you anything. Could we maybe go there a little bit? Why the effort?
Yeah. Well, boy, what a strong question that is, and that's a question that a lot of people have, and it gets back to this model really about being helpful and building your voice of authority. I consult and lecture now all over the world. Last week I was in Finland. A few weeks ago, I was in Amsterdam. I was in London. I lecture all over the United States. 2 weeks ago, I lectured to a group of Chinese MBA students. And the reason I have these opportunities, and the reason I have this opportunity today, is because people know me through my content. That is the only way. As a business owner, I have not spent one single dime on advertising or marketing in 6 years. 100% of my business, 100% of my contacts have connected to me because of my content. Here's a dramatic example. About a month ago, I got an email from a man. He said, "Mr. Schaefer, I've read your blog for years. I've read all your books. The executives at my company, our CEO, has read your books. Will you please come work for us? Can you please help us? Love, Adidas." Okay. Now, so I'm working now for Adidas. I didn't have to bid on the business. There was no quote. They just said, "Tell us how much you charge and help us." And so, now I'm working on it's a very exciting project that involves outdoor gear and extreme sports for Adidas. I'm flying out to Los Angeles in a couple days to meet with their executives out there. It's a lot of fun. It's great money, but all of that came from my content, and that's why I give it away, because it is my marketing. And no matter what happens in my life, no matter how busy I get, I know I have to create excellent, helpful content every single day. That is in some way, and I don't do all the content creation. I also have guest bloggers on my blog, who I pay, by the way. I pay to do that, and so I know that that's my promise, and I can't let people down. And when I start letting people down, if my content starts to falter, then my business starts to falter too.
Yeah. Fantastic story with Adidas, and I think we all have to remember here that journey started actually somewhere smaller. It started with having the courage to just begin finding your voice. Yeah.
My first customer 6 years ago was a caterer.
Yeah.
So it's built and built and built and built. So it does take time to do it, and that's kind of been one of our themes in our discussion today.
Yeah. Mark, I'm not actually still able to scroll in the questions, so I guess I'll have to continue with one of my own and
Is there
another.
could you have them maybe send you an email with the question or
Yeah,
something?
yeah. People, if you can just, as I said, I can't really. Oh, I see. I can see with my colleagues. Hang on a sec. Oh, great. Um, Many questions actually. Let me see. Mark, I can't hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Let me just scroll through the questions here at my colleague's computer. You have answered that one. There's a question here from Lasse. Do you see any dangers to the integrity of journalism when we sort of go into this area of translating tools and tips and tricks from digital marketing into journalism? Did you get that?
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you need to be smart about it. I think, my message today is just be aware of what is possible. Be aware of what is possible. Embrace the technology, and then make the decision that's right for you.
Yeah. I have another area that I actually wanted to visit. You started out by sort of reinvigorating the basic journalistic principles and the roots of journalism, of great and relevant storytelling and reaching out to people who actually need what we can offer as journalists. And then maybe not focus too much on the technology that keeps evolving. But Mark, if we do, at least just for a short while, look at technology, it keeps sort of handing us new opportunities. And I really would like to ask you, one thing is that we all now know that we've been shifting over to mobile and it's hitting us still in a very big way. I think it could be fun to ask someone like you, what's the next wave? I mean, do you see anything on the horizon that we should actually, while we shift to mobile, also be on the lookout for? Because it will keep coming, I guess.
Yeah. The next wave is going to be enabled by wearable technology and augmented reality. And this is going to be very profound for journalism, for storytelling, and for consumers. Because the problem we still have is that to access our information, to access content, we still need an opener. So, what we're on the verge with, let's say, Google Glass. Google Glass, if you've had a chance to try it, I mean, it's very crude. It's amazing technology, but over the next couple of years, this is going to develop so fast. Really, in the next 12 to 18 months, I think we're going to just see this amazing revolution happen where we're not going to have to worry about holding some mobile device to see, or carrying some mobile device. We're not going to have to worry about getting the right Wi-Fi connection. The internet is going to surround us like the air that we breathe. There's going to be a digital layer across the world. We're going to be in this age of context where we can have information sent to us, delivered to us, right exactly when we need it. I mean, this is the most amazing opportunity for journalism and content creation you can imagine, because we're going to have literally no constraints. We're not going to be constrained to the size of a page. We're not going to be constrained by how much airtime we have or how much airtime we can buy. We're going to have this digital layer across the world. There are no boundaries. There's no boundary to the content. There's no boundary to the stories. It can be text and image and audio all at the same time. It could be interchanging. An entire wall can be a screen. An entire building can be a screen. The screen will surround us. So just think of the amazing opportunities that will present for storytelling, and it's not that far away.
You make it sound actually like a storyteller's wet dream. I mean, it sounds as if we are going to actually have to up our game in terms of immersive storytelling.
Well, the thing to think about as we go through each of these digital phases is that there's always been an advantage to the first movers. If you were the first newspaper that had a website, you had an advantage. If you were the first newspaper or journal that figured out search engine optimization, you had an advantage. If you were the first website or newspaper that had a mobile edition, you had an advantage. Same thing's going to happen here. The ones that figure this out first are going to have a profound advantage. I think we need to be thinking about that. I'm working on an augmented reality project right now and I want to learn more about this. I've got to keep in touch with this because this is what the world is going to look like in a very short period of time.
It sounds filled with opportunities, but also very expensive in terms of. I mean, I can imagine that we're going to need new tools for content creation, and I could worry that the free web and as many people as possible having access to publishing tools, that's actually going to have to go through a sort of a transitional period before such advanced tools can actually be accessible. Or do you think that we'll catch up there as well?
I don't think it's going to be expensive. I don't think it's going to be difficult. I mean, there was a great quote that I read. I think it was in the 1980s, and somebody predicted Google. They said, we forecast there's going to be this amazing search engine that can access all the information in the world, but it's going to be so expensive there are only going to be 5 companies in the world that can afford it. Okay? So they got the idea right. They got the business model wrong. If you think about something powerful today like Wikipedia, if you think about something powerful as simple as WordPress that we take for granted, what is the economic value being delivered to you by WordPress? And it's free.
Yeah.
I think the same type of models are going to show up for augmented reality. I think there's going to be crowdsourced, open source, augmented reality platforms. It's going to be menu driven. You'll drag and drop. I think the same models are going to evolve in augmented reality as the other platforms that we use today.
Yeah. I think we're actually nearing a mindset that's very interesting here, because we're saying, and I totally agree with you when you're saying, you're not saying that anyone should do this or that, but we're sort of painting a wall filled with opportunities here, and what you're really also saying is that we need to stay focused on what interests people. But this technical reality, I think, forces these youngsters also to actually be playful with these new technologies and not shy too much away from them, because we do have, I mean, at least in Denmark, as I said, for some years now, we have been behind in journalism in our sort of eagerness to try out these new things.
Well, I think, the lines are blurring everywhere. I mean, what makes you a Danish journalist? What's preventing you from being a global journalist? What's preventing you from the content getting everywhere? Even if you're writing and reporting in Danish, you can get instant translations of anything. So, I was talking to a person the other day that said, he was very, very narrowly focused in what he was trying to do. And I said, who is the leading content creator in Belgium? And he said, well, I'm not sure I really know. I said, who's the leading content creator in Benelux? Who's the leading content creator in Northern Europe? Why can't that be you? Why can't you own that? Because certainly your opportunity, even if you're in Denmark, there's no reason you can't have an audience anywhere. This is something interesting that, I blog in America. The second biggest, I think it's 19% of my readers are in India.
Yeah.
I have a huge following in Pakistan. I have a huge following in Australia. So last spring of 2014, I was on a speaking tour in Australia and New Zealand. So, yes, I think there's Danish journalism, but we also have the opportunity to be world journalists and world content creators.
It's a truly powerful message, and it's true. One of the students in this class told me yesterday that during his apprenticeship at a science journal, the English translation of this science journal actually sometimes made it quite easily into a top hit on Reddit, and it suddenly gave them a ton of traffic. And I think there's this inspiration in that, because it doesn't have to be a professional organization taking that traffic. It could be any one of these guys in this class, actually.
Well, and think about the world that you're entering. The world I entered as a journalism major meant that people read English words on a piece of paper. That was journalism for me. And the opportunity for you is that someone's going to have some augmented reality device, and they're going to be traveling around the world, and they're going to need the information about something, and they're going to get the best information no matter what language it's going to be in, and it's going to be translated before their eyes, or it's going to be read to them in an auditory way right before their eyes. So we're just a couple years away from a world where geography, language barriers, it's going to be irrelevant. So think big, because big is coming at us.
Yeah, it's a great message, as I said, and we're sort of nearing the end of this talk. But we could end it on this note, but it's also, now it's weekend, and then the work starts on Monday, and people have to, I hope, get out there and start finding their voices. Let me just end off then with some advice for you. Is Twitter enough of a place to find your voice, or how to go about it? Does it have to be a blog first, or what's your advice, Mark?
I think it has to be some sort of rich content. Something. It's just like the example that I gave about how I showed up in the New York Times. If all I did was post on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, my voice never would have been heard. The content never would have ignited. So you have to have something, and that's the advantage that you have as journalism majors, is that this is what you love. This is what you're good at, creating some sort of rich long-form content, whether it's in words or video or audio. That's where you need to start. How do you establish your presence? Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, those are good ways to distribute your content. But the rich form content, audio, video, podcast, audio, video, writing, that's the engine. That's the fuel behind Twitter, Facebook, whatever you love. So I would start there. Figure out, do I want to write? Do I want to do videos? Do I want to do a podcast? That's where I would start.
All right. Mark, thank you so much for getting up early and overcoming the initial computer problems. We're really happy to have had this opportunity, and I think you're absolutely right. We must make a plan for how to make you actually stand here in the class. Mark, let people know where do they, if they would like to connect with you, what's the best way?
Well, no, I found nobody can spell Schaefer. It's too difficult. So my website is businessesgrow.com, and you can find my blog there. You can find my podcast. You can find how to connect with me on the social web. There's lots of free resources on there, and I'd love to stay in touch with you and stay connected.
That's great. And I apologize. Those of you who sent in questions that I weren't able to scroll through, I apologize for that technical glitch. But I hope we got covered. I hope we covered most of your questions anyway. Mark, thanks. Have a nice day and a great weekend, huh?
Okay. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Bye bye. Ja, min computer er fuldstændig frossen, så jeg kan ikke engang stoppe broadcasten, så jeg er nødt til at gøre det på den rigtig, rigtig hårde måde. Så til jer, der... Nej, vi bliver ikke her til mandag. Til jer, der kigger derudefra, tak fordi I kiggede med, og til jer herindefra, have en god weekend alle sammen. Og så nu trykker jeg altså bare på den store knap på min computer, så bye bye.